Back in January, Hitman 3 VR finally launched on PC, and to say that it wasn't good would be a huge understatement. So well over half a year later, surely it's gotten better, right? Well, no. No, it hasn't. Its main problems ultimately come down to a fundamental misunderstanding of how VR games are supposed to function. For example, you can't pick up objects with your non-dominant hand. It just doesn't work. Even the items that show up in 47's offhand have to be equipped with your dominant hand's grip button. It simply makes no sense. Essentially, your non-dominant hand is just for show. Sure, some controls are bound to that controller, notably the grip button to sprint, which, side note, might be the worst control mapping I've ever seen. But if you take away the physical tracked representation of that particular hand, the experience doesn't change whatsoever. There really isn't a good excuse for why on earth it's been designed this way. Either the developers have never played a VR game in their life, or they simply copy and pasted the year-old version from PlayStation VR. Because when you think about it, that makes total sense. Prior to the game's release in 2021, IO Interactive had been asked by Sony to make an exclusive VR mode for their PSVR headset, and of course, they obliged. But they did happen to run into some problems, the most apparent being the abhorrent PlayStation VR Move controllers. So instead of dealing with their terrible tracking and lack of viable buttons, they opted to abandon them entirely, and that's why the PSVR version requires the use of a DualShock 4. So what went wrong? Well, there seems to be a fairly obvious answer. Hitman 3 VR just wasn't designed with PCVR in mind. Instead, they had to work within the restrictions of a much more limited platform, and therefore simply porting it to PC is not enough. Without rebuilding the entire VR mode from the ground up, you're bound to be left with the not so solid foundations of the PSVR version, and that's exactly what happened. When the VR mode released on Steam, players were quick to notice that some of the most obvious expected features simply weren't available. One of the most egregious was the lack of support for moving and turning with your physical body, which made it nearly impossible to play standing. And that's not to mention the blurry dynamic resolution, terrible gunplay, poor performance, atrocious button mapping, and overall lack of polish. The state of Hitman 3 VR is simply inexcusable, and what could have been one of the best virtual reality titles has seemingly been left to die.